March 26, 2018. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mr. Cummings, absent. Ms. McGuire.
Here.
Mr. Gieske.
Here.
Mr. Palmer.
Here.
Mr. Nordine here. Mr. Byer.
Here.
Mr. Weed.
Here. Are there any agenda additions?
There is one item I would like to add to my report, and that is a potential sanitary sewer agreement with Oscoda Township.
Number 6 under the superintendent report. I'm sorry.
Letter I, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, letter I under superintendent. Any others?
No, sir.
Is there a motion to set the agenda?
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Gieske. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda's set. Next, we have a public hearing and a public meeting for grant applications for the 2018 Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund and the Michigan Department of Transportation, who manages the Federal Transportation Alternatives Program grant. I need a motion to go into the public meeting.
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Gieske, support by Mr. Byer. Roll call.
Mr. Byer.
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Gieske.
Yes.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. We are now in the public hearing / public meeting. So first we'll go over the grant for the Phase 3 bike path, which runs from the west side of the school out to the west side of Old Orchard Park. So we can now go into a public comment for this. Does anybody have any comments regarding the bike path grant for Phase 3? Does the board have any comments for this?
Does the bike path really go to the western edge of Old Orchard or just to the entrance of Old Orchard?
To the western edge, and that was so that when they approached the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, it could all be done at one time within that property boundary rather than trying to do another time for a small section.
Okay, makes sense.
Any other comments for that? Okay, then we'll go into the Ratliff Park MNRTF grant for the southeastern portion of the park. Does anyone have any public comment regarding that? Okay, does the board have any comment?
Kathy raised her hand.
Oh, yes. Can you come up to the podium?
So this was about Ratliff Park?
Correct.
Okay. question about the possible remediation activity related to Ratliff Park and the plan, the future plan. That's the question.
Thank you.
I hate to be a border guy here, but southeast section of Ratliff, which for the sake of the audience, goes how far?
According to the map here,
Which they don't have.
way down in here. Thought we did have an image. Yeah, we do. That handles the whole area that has the falling seawall, the pavilion with the wooden platform, and just a little bit further west of that.
Okay. Does not include Warrior Pavilion. Right?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other comments?
I would just say that I'm pleased with the work that Beckett Rader has done so far for us in making these designs for our parks. I think it will be a huge improvement when this is done. So.
Okay, not hearing anything else, I need a motion to come out of the public hearing / public meeting.
I make that motion.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Byer, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call.
Mr. Gasky.
Yes.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Byer.
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes. All right, we now come into our public comment period. There's a 4-minute time limit. For this first one, you get to fill out a comment card and provide it to the superintendent. When you come to the podium, please introduce yourself. Do we have any cards?
We do. Ann Richards would like to talk about termination of her employment.
Ann Richards, 6185 North US 23, Oscoda. I can honestly say that there was never a dull moment during my employment with Oscoda Township. I'm proud of the projects and initiatives I was either the lead or assisted with. I can't thank you enough, Bob, for all that you have taught me over the last decade. It was truly an honor to work under your leadership and for the community that I love. The following are what I believe were accomplishments during my employment with Oscoda Township. Wayfinding signage project with Oscoda Township, the 2012 Pier project, including my specific role with securing approximately $250,000 in grant funding, the 2012 road reconstruction and streetscape project, water main projects in the downtown, the DDA's downtown sidewalk and paving lot improvement project, which included grant funding from the USDA, the DDA-funded facade improvement grant programs that we offered in the downtown, the Wordsmith District responsibilities that I held, which included MEDC grants, real estate transfers, demolition project, tenant management, and a $1.2 million VA expansion project. The management role for the community center that I took on for 2 years, Oscoda Beach Park improvements, including the splash pad and skate park, the DDA Artisan Market project, the Michigan Trust Fund acquisition grant for the vacant land to expand the Oscoda Beach Park, the water main extension project due to PFA contamination, and I also served as the liaison for the township and DDA with VILA, Downtown Beautification, the Oscoda Chamber, and CVB. On Wednesday, February 7th, around 3 p.m., I was informed by Bob Stalker that the Township Supervisor, Aaron Weed, had demanded that Mr. Stalker, as Personnel Director, terminate my employment with the Township. Mr. Stalker refused and notified the full Township Board about what Mr. Weed had asked him to do. I was not provided any details behind the reasons for Mr. Weed's request and was told I could request a meeting with the Board to discuss that matter. On Friday, February 9th, Mr. Stalker, at a pre-board meeting, informed the Board he would be adding his resignation to the agenda for the Monday, February 12th meeting. On Monday, February 12th, I requested a meeting with Mr. Weed to ask his reasons for demanding my termination. He asked Mr. Palmer to sit in on the meeting. The meeting took place at approximately 3:15 and lasted about 30 minutes. Mr. Weed cited 3 main issues, I believe he called them, with my performance. The first was the water main extension and my focus on grant guidelines, not on land use impacts. The second was the grounds around the former school in the downtown. And the third was my handling of the former school property involving the DDA, again, the former school in the downtown. Mr. Palmer did not provide any specifics, but instead provided a general statement of, overall, I have not been happy with the work out of your office over the last year. After hearing their comments, I did not discuss them because I thought I would be given the full opportunity, or the opportunity to talk with the full board. On Monday at 7 p.m., that same day, Mr. Weed added my position to the agenda, and with a 4-3 vote, my employment was terminated. I am here tonight to ask 4 members for the accountability they say I lacked. I have been accused publicly of illegal acts as well as incompetence concerning the water main extension project. To the best of my knowledge, I have never broken any laws or policies, and if I had, I have no doubt that Mr. Stalker, as the personnel director, would have taken appropriate action. Enough time has passed. Tonight I am requesting specifics as to my performance and how it was a factor in the delay in the water main extension. Thank you for your time.
Do we have any other cards?
We do. Kathy Woosterbarth would like to talk about the Now Group.
Hi, Kathy Woosterbarth, 211 Evergreen Avenue. I wanted to touch base about some things on the water contamination, and there's a lot of updates to be said, but I wanted to talk about the federal budget that just was passed on Thursday or Friday, that included some things that will hopefully impact our community, including the health studies, the national health studies that will be funded, that we're hoping to have our area included, the $40 million for BRAC location remediation, and then doubling the size of the emergency water grants that will hopefully impact our community also. The next Now meeting is on Thursday, March 29th, right here in the library at 4:30 to 6:30. Including Debbie Stabenow's office, and then also the director and the team. She's collected quite a few members of her team that she wants to be included in the meeting. In terms of the funding and the attention for Wurtsmith Air Force Base regarding these issues, we have hopes that our legislators have urged the government entities to make Wurtsmith Air Force Base a priority. We also believe that Stabenow's office and Kildee's office have been highly engaged with our community in terms of making sure that they're contacting us on updates and making sure that we understand some of the processes, so we really appreciate that. One of the things I wanted to urge the township today was to make sure that they make any issue that is related to addressing the contamination a high priority with any business that you have. It is within our capability to move things along, and we do not want to be an excuse for any delays in this process.
Thank you.
Any other cards?
No.
Before we move on to anything, I would hope that Ann's request that some kind of a face-to-face meeting to explain what the charges are against her and let her reply to them. In our agenda tonight, in the superintendent's part, is some preliminary talk about a facilitation effort and cost of up to $2,000 or more a day. I think having a a meeting to talk about what went on, and not just brush it under the rug, a public meeting, but certainly an all-board meeting would be very, very helpful. And in the narrative Bob has put here regarding this facilitation, they talk about teamwork. I think a good place to start with teamwork would be to make sure the whole board has all the information, not just 4 people and 3 people are out in the cold. You can't talk about teamwork without unanimity, everybody involved. So I would hope we would have some kind of response to that request at some point. I don't know what the format is, a regular meeting like this or a work session, but something, not just ignore what she's asking. She's given us too much, 10 years of work. She deserves some kind of closure. You know, what did I do wrong? And here are my answers to that. So,
All right, we now go on to the consent agenda. Any comments regarding the meeting minutes of March 9th for the work session, regular meeting minutes of March 12th, and work session meeting minutes of March 15th? Any comments regarding the payment of bills for $234,422.37?
I had one question, more of a comment actually, on one of the bills in our list. It's the actually the predominant bill of the $234,000. It's $210,300 to Spicer Engineering, and I was hoping perhaps Mr. Stockard could let the public know and elaborate a little bit about what this bill is for.
Sure. That is for Spicer contracted with the folks who did the cleaning and televising of the sanitary sewer system. It was part of the SAW grant. And my understanding is they hung on to the invoices during the period, the several months that work was being accomplished, until they had all the tapes in hand. So it's an accumulation of several months' work. We will be reimbursed for it, but we need to pay the bill at this point, presumably, subject obviously to the board approving it. But it is $200,000 of that $800 and some thousand grant.
Right. And the reason I bring that up is I've had several of my neighbors and people in the community ask me about the proposed millage assessment that we've approved. And when they go online and look at our budget, they see some pretty big numbers there, and they question, you know, what do we really need that for? And my explanation is this: that we have some large projects that oftentimes we have to front load. In other words, we have to pay for the project up front, and then we get reimbursed. And the township isn't any different than any of us that have our checkbooks that we have to balance. And if you have a bill that's due, you have to make sure that the money is there to pay for it. Ms. Richards mentioned a good example of that is the VA project, where we had that project was given to us by the VA. We had contractors, various contractors, a construction management team that oversaw the whole project, and so it was well over $1 million that we had to pay for before we could get reimbursed by the VA for that project. So the bottom line of this is the question that is posed is that we try and maintain a balance in our funds so that we can cover these kinds of costs. And one of the problems that our millage committee addressed was the fact that over the past 10 years, our budget has declined by $270,000. Obviously, we can't continue down that road, so we need some additional funds to help with all these various projects, and it's inexpensive to run, you know, a sewer system, a water system, all the various programs that we provide in the township that have to be front-loaded, and then we wait for our money to come in. So since this was an example of a large bill that we have to front load, I thought it was a good time to kind of explain to the audience and the residents and my neighbors that I've tried to explain this to some of the reasons for the millage that we're proposing. So thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.
Okay, any comments regarding the John Deere backhoe auction sale and the township representative appointments for Hushrod Central Dispatch?
Bob, on the appointments for Husserl and Central Dispatch, you have held those for many years, right?
Yes.
Maybe always your entire tenure as,
Huron Shores, I believe, yes. I think that's the case with Central Dispatch.
is it written anywhere in our bylaws or that the, since we changed to a charter township, that the superintendent should hold those positions, or it's just become a custom?
The latter, I would say. It is at the board's discretion, and that's part of why I'm raising the question.
Well, by raising the question, are you suggesting that we depart from that, or should the new superintendent just do what, fill your shoes?
Well, that would be up to the board. Part of the reason I'm raising it is there could be a gap there timing-wise, too, so that everybody's thinking in advance. I'm not making a suggestion that things change necessarily, just something to keep our eye on moving forward.
Are there alternates, board members that are alternates for both organizations?
There is in the case of Huron Shores. Our police chief has sort of informally filled in for me at 911, but that's a less formalized process.
And that would be a possible avenue if there's a gap between your departure and a new person starting?
Yeah, it certainly could be.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Well, in that vein, I was just curious because in the packet you have the articles of incorporation for the water authority, which dates back to '93. But you stated in there that Mr. Weed has been designated an alternate. Have those articles of incorporation been updated, or is there a resolution to that effect, or something in writing that details
I believe
that?
there is a resolution for the supervisor to be the alternate at Oscoda Township's level. The discussion that we had earlier relative to the articles of incorporation being amended is something I'm going to have to check into further.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Did you have an alternate before I was the alternate?
I am not certain. That was a while ago.
Mr. Hubel?
I don't recall that to be the case, but it's possible.
I believe in the articles of incorporation it lists Mr. Wiltsey as the alternate. So that was a while ago.
That was a while ago, yeah.
Anything else? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Gajewski. Roll call?
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, subcommittee reports, project updates. We've got an update here where Debbie Stabenow's office called and informed me about the omnibus bill for the $10 million for human impact study for both active duty and private residents who are impacted. There's also the $40 million that's going to Army bases, so that doesn't affect us at all. There's one DOD department account that will increase $54.1 million to be used specifically for PFAS remediation DOD-wide. And the USDA Emergency Water Assistance Grant limit has been increased from $500,000 to $1 million. As far as the Phase 1 water main project update, all grant and land requirements have been fulfilled, and documentation was turned over to the USDA, so hopefully by the end of this week I'll have an update regarding the bidding process. And then on the GAC plant land access agreement that we're working on for the Air Force, we're waiting for the Air Force attorney to contact our attorney. Does anybody else have anything else to update? All right, then on to reports. The Velo Weed Committee recommendation for 2018 herbicide application.
Yes, I've attached a request for proposals that was issued by Lake Pro, who is the manager by contract for the weed control program on Van Etten Lake. I've also attached a bid tabulation sheet that Lake Pro put together after receiving bids. The recommendation from the Weed Control Committee is that PLM Lake and Land Management Corporation be awarded the contract. Given our standard practice, that would presumably be based upon and subject to execution of a contract agreement. You'll note in reviewing the bid tabulation results that one vendor's name was redacted. That was based upon a determination that they did not comply with the solicitation requirements and should be disqualified. So that's how we arrived at the recommendation. So at this point, it's being suggested that the board accept the recommendation from the Weed Control Committee for engaging the services of PLM Lake and Land Management Control, again, subject to preparation and execution of a contract agreement, and that would be for the 2018 weed control program.
Any comments?
I think we've used PLM before, if I remember correctly, so I think wouldn't be a problem with them knowing the sort of the lay of the lake.
That is my understanding, that they've been a service provider in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Immediate past?
2 years ago, I believe.
I think so.
Last year.
Last year, this year, no gap.
No gap.
No gap. Okay. I would move that we accept the recommendation of the Vela Board that engage the service of PLM Lake and Land Management Corporation.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Byer, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, fireworks permit application.
Yeah, we talked about this topic at the last meeting, the permits necessary to facilitate the 2018 4th of July show, and was presented for potential execution by the supervisor. A question emerged as to the accuracy of the quantity of fireworks that were set forth in the permit, and that matter was tabled. I followed up on that potential concern with an email, which is attached to my report. I had located the 2017 permit for comparison purposes, and it did appear that the 30% grand finale enhancement that were due for 2018 may not have been reflected. The vendor basically indicated that the permit is kind of a generic form where they're not intending to have an exact accounting of the size and quantity of fireworks, but instead it's kind of a guideline. And they did provide more detailed documentation of what they intend to do in 2018, which was included in the packet. So with that additional feedback from the vendor and documentation, I'm again asking that the board consider approving execution of the permit.
Comments?
Well, I would just say I was the one that raised the question at the last board meeting because when I looked at the numbers, they didn't quite add up to me. But like I said, I wasn't able to get the 2017 numbers. But I think I mentioned at that time, I didn't have a problem with our fireworks vendor. I think over the years they've done a nice job. My family, I've been to the fireworks as long as I can remember, and they've always done a nice job. But there was a little problem last year, and they corrected that, and with the promise of the 30%. And then when Mr. Stalker provided the numbers for what they're proposing for 2018 for the finale, it does add up to roughly a 30% increase in that display. So My whole concern was that, the residents get what we were promised by them, and I'm confident we will now with that, so. I would move that we have the supervisor execute the fireworks permit for 2018.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Gieske. Roll call?
Mr. Gasky.
Yes.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Byer.
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, property purchase offer.
Yes, I have attached correspondence from a Realtor setting forth a purchase offer for property in the Wordsmith District, identified by parcel number. I've attached a map. Also on the board table, there's a more updated exhibit from the assessor's office indicating our value from that standpoint, along with a map showing where the property is in the Wordsmith District. We had been marketing the property at a price of $8,800. The offer is for $8,000. It was submitted on a purchase agreement from a Realtor's office. We indicated to them that we prefer using our own purchase agreement. One was prepared, and they're indicating that that is acceptable. There was one change to that agreement based on the request from the representative of the buyer, and that is a 30-day period in paragraph 26 to do due diligence. So we are at a point where if the board wishes to proceed in transacting the sale, consideration of approving the purchase agreement, which we have drafted, is being sought. I note also that I spoke with the Realtor, and they are requesting a $500 commission. It's somewhat negotiable is my impression, but that is the expectation on the part of the seller's or the buyer's representative.
Comments?
Tell me about this 30 days for due diligence. That's something they're asking for?
It is.
They can investigate the property to see if it meets all their, is that right?
They can. They would need to actually do physical things on the property. Presumably, they'd need our permission. So they didn't specify in great detail what the due diligence entailed.
Well, hopefully this due diligence business works both ways. And I'm glad to sell property, and I don't mean to hang on to stuff. I am a hoarder, I was going to say, but very much. But I think we have due diligence responsibilities also. Do we know what they're going to do? It's in the industrial park. And the lady that is made the offer through a Realtor instead of directly, what is it? You're going to manufacture something? Do we have the right to find out what they're going to do? Or do we just, they say no, we're not going to tell you, then we have to accept that?
Well, I asked the question, and the Realtor indicated that he did not know. So if we're wanting to press the question, then potentially it could be tabled, subject to getting input from legal counsel and then making the inquiry as appropriate.
Well, if it's something normal and basic, wouldn't she come forth? There's no problem? Don't you think? If it's a big secret, then that's a red flag for me.
Well, they have to follow the zoning laws. I mean, it's not like
Yeah.
they can put
Yeah, I
something there that
understand
doesn't
there
belong.
is that.
So-
Yes, yeah.
I'm happy to get rid of it.
Yeah, they will have to comply with the zoning. They will have to implement a site plan. Or, for all we know, they just want to buy it and hang on to it for a while.
I would hope that, we have quite a list of properties that we're hopefully going to be having our in-house Realtor sell for us. And I wouldn't think we would have to make inquiries into each of those sales as to what their plans for each of those properties would be. I mean, there's 50 or 60 properties that hopefully we can sell, and I don't see where we would, because like was mentioned, you have to follow the law and the zoning ordinances and site plans and that sort of thing. So I don't see where I don't see where we can require that somebody tell us what they plan to do with the property, because maybe they don't know right now. Maybe they just saw that and thought, geez, 2.3 acres for $8,000 is a pretty good deal. I don't know. I did have a different problem with this because, and I realize we're not using their purchase agreement, we're using ours. But in paragraph 29 of their purchase agreement, it says, seller also agrees to pay realtor a commission stated in the licensing agreement corresponding to property described. Now, I was confused by that. I don't know what listing agreement that is designating. And then when I read our purchase agreement, which is kind of a standard purchase agreement that we use for properties, as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no mention of a commission in there at all. So it seems to me that is something that should be addressed as to what, at least put into writing, what that commission would be, not just saying, well, okay, we'll agree to $500 or something, just as a verbal contract, so to speak. I would like to see some language in there that would specify what the. I'm a little disappointed that the two sales we've had haven't just gone directly to our sort of in-house realtor that we agreed upon, but for whatever reason we have this in hand, and I guess they've agreed to our purchase agreement, given the extra 30 days. My only concern is that, they've stated in their purchase agreement that they would, that the seller agrees to pay a commission. I don't quite understand what the statement in here of a listing agreement. I don't know of a listing agreement that exists for these properties, but we're not using that purchase agreement anyways. But I think there should be something in our purchase agreement that at least delineates what that commission is going to be.
We certainly can do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other comments?
I think we didn't go through our in-house that you referred to because we haven't finished all the paperwork with them yet. It's pretty much.
Well, yeah, the contract hasn't been signed.
Correct.
But
So.
If a different realtor could handle the sale, then I don't know why our realtor couldn't have handled the sale.
Right.
But I guess that's neither here nor there. We have an offer, and I agree with Ms. Squire. I'd like to get rid of the property, so, and this is a reasonable offer. It's near our asking price. So.
I'll make a motion that we accept the offer and with the changes that Phil's talking about, with some kind of language in there.
Recognizing the commission amount.
Yeah.
Is there support?
Support.
Is the board satisfied that all our codes and so forth take care of things like noises and smells and additional water problems that they might create in an industrial park? Or am I being as worry-wart about things like that? Is that all covered to your satisfaction? How close is this to residents on the base, the villages, if there's a noise problem or something like that?
Well, that's a value judgment, I guess, but it's east of the ball field complex.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some distance, but opinions could vary as to whether that distance is adequate, depending on what the activity is that's being.
Well, I agree with Aaron saying that they may just want to buy a piece of property and sit on it for a while. I mean, I know that. But I would think a little more probing from us, or you, wouldn't be all that bad or wasted effort. Like, what are you gonna do with it? And if they won't tell us, that does tell us something. But if the board wants to move ahead, go ahead without me.
All right, roll call.
Mr. Byer,
No.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, water main extension, Phase 2 grant application.
Yes, board members might recall that we had pursued a pre-application with USDA for the second phase of the water main project, intended to address PFAS contamination issues, and there's a map attached to my report which generally defines the area of concern. At the same time, discussion is continued with legislators regarding potential funding sources and strategies to put together a funding package at both the state and federal levels. Recently, our township supervisor was advised that it may be advantageous to move the USDA funding application process forward so that funds do become available. We're down the road a ways, if you will, towards implementation. To that end, I've included a proposal from Rowe Professional Services Company that we obtained several weeks ago with my report. That was done at the time with the thought that the information would be of value once the funding questions and uncertainty were removed. The total cost is, on a not-to-exceed basis, is $26,202, which would be billed as needed. One of the components, task one, is the pre-application, so I note the majority, if not all, that work has been completed. If the board would like to move forward in advancing the project, it would appear reasonable to consider approaching it on a phased basis, and that might have Rowe and Township representatives meeting with USDA first to confirm where we stand with the pre-application, then reporting back to the board before we move forward with task two, basically the full application at that point, and getting authorization to proceed, and maybe in the interim, more information will become available regarding funding options. There would also be some benefit if there is a predisposition to get the machinery and gear to have a contract in place also. We would presumably want to have a contract with our service provider here. There is an element here of betting on the come in terms of committing to spend some resources, but again, if you do it on a phased basis, that would be limited. We're hoping funding would become available in the future and want to be in the best position possible to deal with it if that happens. So if the board is inclined to proceed, I would be looking for acceptance of the proposal submitted by Rowe, subject to drafting and execution of a professional services agreement. And the assumption in doing that would be that we would proceed on a phased basis like I just described.
I just want to add that with this change in the emergency water grant, that there's going to be a meeting held next week with Dan Kilde's office and the USDA regarding this. That also includes Oscoda. So I recommend we wait until after that meeting so we know which grant we need to go for first, either the rural development or the emergency water grant.
So you want to table this for
the next meeting?
Yeah.
When you say go ahead to determine which grant we'll go ahead with first, are you suggesting we'll ultimately be going for both of them or one or the other?
It's probably going to be one or the other.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'd like to get a good evaluation on the best course before we go ahead with this, because this quote here deals with the rural development grant.
Mm-hmm.
We can't apply for both grants?
Maybe there's something that could happen. they've really been trying to work on things to try and make this more financially helpful to us. But we'll just have to see how this goes at next week's meeting.
But this is to either accept or not accept Roe's proposal. Wouldn't we still be using them regardless of the outcome of that meeting with Senator Kildee? So couldn't we approve the proposal to go with a not to exceed amount for Roe, and then I can't imagine they will be submitting the grant before that meeting would happen, so they could get input on that meeting. I don't see why we would wait to authorize the proposal with Roe to prepare the grant, regardless of which grants we're going to go for.
Well, if it turns out that we don't go for the rural development, we go for the emergency water grant, then this proposal may change.
Roe has not taken that into consideration, you're saying?
I don't know.
One avenue might be, if we're committed to moving forward, to ask the attorney to prepare a professional services agreement. And so we have that in hand, and we can modify the agreement and ask our contractor to modify their proposal accordingly. Again, given the board's potential sense of urgency here, because you're really talking about a 2-week lag in getting the contract prepared and so forth.
Well,
I guess there isn't a
that's
problem.
also a possibility.
I guess there isn't a problem with waiting 2 weeks to approve this agreement. I just think this is an important topic, that this is a big issue for the township, getting the water mains extended throughout the township, where the contamination issues are hurting our economy and our real estate and everything else. So I guess maybe I'm a little too gung-ho on this, but I guess waiting 2 weeks to find out what information we get from Senator Kildee would probably not be the end of the world, I guess.
And the USDA right now doesn't have really much information regarding this change.
Right.
This increase in the amount of funds they can give. I think we need just a little more time to let that settle in, and
Okay.
we have some firmer ground to go on in a couple weeks. Any other comments?
I kind of like Bob's idea about at least starting the draft of the contract anyways, to get the ball rolling with the attorney. That can't hurt, and then just tweak it where necessary.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good with me. I kind of share Bill's sentiment. I mean, I want to be poised. I want to be ready to act as soon as we can. So, just whatever we can do to put ourselves in the best position, even if it's small increments of progress, just so that we're as ready as we can be, is what I'm looking for from us. So, without being foolish, of course.
All right, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we go ahead and start drafting the contract agreement with the attorney and give authorization to tweak where necessary after the outcome of the meeting.
I'll support that. Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Weed. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Nardine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, superintendent selection process.
Yes, we have now had application materials submitted by candidates for the superintendent's position distributed to board members at the work session. We talked about establishing a process for moving forward. During that work session, it was suggested that it would be helpful for yours truly to act as a facilitator of the process. So that's sort of what I'm trying to do here, frankly, is outline steps and questions that might need to be answered. To help in that process, I've attached a document from the ICMA, and that's the International City Management Association, containing recruitment guidelines and an overview of the selection process. The general outline then that I'm suggesting would have board members ranking the candidate credentials in descending order from 6 to 1, with 6 being the application considered most appropriate by an individual board member. A compilation then could be compiled of the rankings by myself, and we could use that as a good starting point to identify candidates to interview. I note that one candidate has requested confidentiality, at least one, so that we should not divulge the names publicly until we get to the point of the interviews. And basically that would involve giving folks a chance to withdraw from consideration if they don't want to be acknowledged publicly. So questions in that regard: is 6 the right number of candidates? Does the board want to meet as a whole or as some subcommittee or a few board members, however is deemed appropriate, to talk about the tabulation results? Do we think it's appropriate to do preliminary background investigations prior to interviews? And if so, who and how would that process be undertaken? In terms of the next step, we would finalize a list of candidates and schedule interviews. My assumption, given discussion to date, is that would be a process undertaken by the entire board. Along those lines, then, my assumption is we would want a standard list of interview questions, but that is one of the points I'm raising here. Is that assumption true? How would we go about conducting the interviews? Who would be the party or parties charged with doing the interviews in terms of actually asking the questions? My thought there is it might be appropriate, for instance, if we had 21 questions, for each board member to ask 3 and alternate through on kind of a panel basis. But that might be a good way to do it, and then alternate back through with additional follow-up questions that individual board members might have. But anyway, in terms of direction, that is one of the questions. And at what point do we want to have input from department heads? Are we going to invite them to the interviews? That was touched upon at the work session. And then would the board find it to be of value to conduct a second interview? That might be a point to talk about later after we've gone through the first. I just want to make you aware that that is a possibility, and it can be helpful if there's difficulty finalizing a decision. And then the last step would be reference checks and background investigations, and we would need to talk about, again, who and how. Would we do it internally? Would we consider hiring a contractor? Would the board want to consider visiting a community where the candidate worked? Probably not in Oregon, but if it's relatively close, that might make sense. And would it make sense also to consider checking references earlier in the process? Some communities actually do the reference checks before the interviews. I'm not suggesting we would want to do that. Typically, we do not here, but that is a possibility. So last step would be identifying a candidate and negotiating an agreement. So for purposes of moving forward, I would suggest we focus on steps 1 and 2 here, which would involve ranking the candidates, identifying those to be interviewed, and then talking about the process of the interviews themselves.
We have 20 applications, is that right?
I believe that's right in the ballpark. I haven't counted them recently. Last I knew, I think we had 18, but it's quite possible a few
I did
more.
a quick count. I came up with 20, but I could be wrong.
Could well be. Yeah.
I think it's 19. Okay. I think I have 19 on my list.
We have a deadline? I mean, if an application comes in next Tuesday or something, we throw it in the mix, or is there a deadline when it's over?
There is not. It's open until filled. However, we have not received an application for several days, so okay. I think we sort of got the initial surge from the advertisements we did.
I recommend that we work on step 1, which is ranking the candidates, and then work on the rest of the items at a work session. That way we've got step one, like you had mentioned before, taking small steps. That way we've got that initial step done, and then we can work on the next process after that.
I'm good with that. I'd like to see the whole, I know Bob mentioned maybe having a subcommittee or, something for the tabulation and detail, but I think that's just as important as the interview process for everybody to be able to do that too. So I'd like to see the whole board do that. So maybe that is something we could do at a work session.
My idea would be is that we rank the top 6 picks that we have. Each one of us has. 1 through 6, 6 being our top pick. And then of those 6, pull out maybe the top 3 from that. And then working from that point.
Oh, so you mean there's only 1 6, 1 5, 1 4?
For each person.
Right.
For each board member.
Yes, yeah. So I can't go through, I mean, I'm not trying to fight you on this, but I would not have like 3 6s and a 3 and a 2 and a 1.
Right.
Okay.
And that way we can pull out the highest scores that would be pretty much how the board views which ones would be at the top. And then if one of those 3 for some reason is taking a job somewhere else or doesn't want to do it anymore, then we can move on to number 4.
Do you think we should narrow it to 3?
Just an idea, whatever you think.
I mean, we talked about it at the work session when we discussed this originally, that there's, I mean, technically, if we want to get black and white about it, there's a mathematical way to do it. That's what you're alluding to exactly, but average the numbers, see who ranks the highest, and pull the top. Then the number is how many do we pull, but we can determine that at the work session, I suppose. It may be that the math works out that there's a clear demarcation between the top candidates and the rest. There might be an obvious number to choose.
Yeah, what I did, I took Bob's recommendation over the weekend, and since I received the list of candidates, I went through the entire list and made several pages of notes on each candidate of pluses and minuses that I found, and some just information for myself to relieve. And then this weekend, I just made a list of all the candidates, all 19, and then next to each candidate, I put a number between 1 and 6. And some are 1s, there's some 2s. I think I had 5 that were 5s and 1 that was a 4.5. So my thought was, if we were to each do a list like that, if then we turn those all in, and I'd be happy to help Bob with that, or if somebody else wanted to help in just compiling those numbers. And because based on my list from that, you would eliminate 13 of the 19 would be out. And if we compared the list and it was virtually the same 6 that everybody was keen on, or if there was a 7th that slipped in there, then we could redo that list again, each one of us, rating them.
You mean redo the shorter list?
Redo the shorter list, yeah. Just a thought, and I have my list ready to go.
Yeah, my list is ready as well, so as soon as we turn them over and figure out.
I brought my list with me.
Yeah, I got it too.
So did I.
So,
I went through them and then I looked at the ad also that we placed because I thought that was a big key factor for some things, actually. Was
Exactly.
that you went back through it and got rid of a few other ones.
But however the board wants to do it, like I said, I went through and put a number by each person, and if you'd like help, Bob, I'll help you to tabulate those, and
yeah.
then we can just make a list of, say, 6 people that are the highest numbers out of all those we have.
Just so I'm clear, what I had envisioned was there would only be 1 6 per board
Right.
member.
One
Yeah.
5, 1
Yeah.
4, 1
Ranking
3.
as opposed to
Yeah.
scoring.
Right.
I think it's important that everybody approaches it with the same mindset.
Correct.
Not that we have to do it that way, but whatever we select, whatever approach we take, consistency is probably important.
I would like to do it that way, and then also I'd like everybody to sit down and be able to talk about their 6 and say what they, why they consider that their first pick, and then try to work together to bring it down to, if we're going to make it lower, 3 or 4, and then everybody can say, this is why I feel this way, or not, and get other people's perspective on, possibly on the same person.
Well, one benefit of doing it numerically to begin with is it gives us the opportunity to deal with the singular candidate or multiple candidates. I believe it's only one who've requested confidentiality. Because on that basis, you could reach out and make contact without getting into public discussion of specific names.
So,
Yep. I got my list ready to turn over to you for tabulation, so.
all right, so is that
How does a
consensus?
5.5 go? Or a 4.5
Well, if it's on a scoring basis,
to the next highest number?
if it's on a scoring basis, and then
I knew I thrown
based
them
on
out.
You're
there.
gonna have to
Who
make it
receives
a
the most
4 or a
points?
5.
Yeah, it's gotta be a 4 or a 5, no oddball number,
No oddball numbers, correct.
solid number.
Top 6, that's it.
Yeah, ranked, not scored, it seems
Yeah.
to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, and so if we go through a 1 through 6 method, again, 6 being the highest, what, do we want to turn those over to Mr. Stalker and then have him tally the scores on those and then discuss them in a work session from that point, or?
I think so.
Seems to me,
Yeah.
if we turned them over, he tallied them or tabulated them, and then at our next strategic planning work session, we could look at what the tabulation tells us.
Right.
It would certainly reduce the list considerably from what we have now, I would think.
And it would probably, we're going to talk about the strategic planning session later. It would be a benefit to have that occur before the next meeting, because I'm advised we need to narrow the list down to the folks to invite for interviews and have a official action on that.
So, does everybody, we can have, everybody can submit theirs to Mr. Stalker, either through writing or through email, and then
Bob can tabulate them.
we will have that in our packet for the next work session. So have it to him prior to that work session. Does that work for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
We're good on that subject for
I
now?
believe we are.
All right. Then the next one, Beckett and Rader Contractor Amendment Grant Application Authorization.
Yes, relating to the public hearing we had earlier, public meeting. We met with our planning commission, our planning consultant, to talk about a number of things, including the potential submission of a grant application prior to April 1st. They provided a document which basically established a no-fee relationship for submitting the grant application, preparing and submitting the grant application on the township's behalf. But in looking at the agreement and the time constraints that we are faced with, it would appear that the shortest distance between 2 points, if you will, would be to modify the agreement that we have in place with them now to include the grant preparation and submission as an additional scope of work, pay the $3,000 fee, and with the understanding that it would be applied against implementation costs if we opted to hire them and the grant was successful. So that would require a fairly quick turnaround in terms of getting that agreement prepared. It would need to happen before the next board meeting, so I would be seeking approval in advance for execution of that agreement. The other benefit is we don't know what the fees will be at this point. We haven't seen the grant application, so it allows the township some options in terms of who we hire. Not that they may well not might wind up getting the work, but it at least gives us some flexibility and options. That would be part one of the topic. The second part is the actual grant application and where our focus would be. They're suggesting the southeast end of Van Etten Lake. There are drawings and a cost estimate that they prepared and submitted to me. They are generally consistent with what we talked about at the work session. They are assuming a match of $100,000, which is referenced in the resolution for purposes of implementing the project. So we would be able to move forward in relatively short time frame here with getting the grant submitted by adopting the resolution and acknowledging the necessity to amend the contract and approve the $3,000 fee that they are indicating they would need to charge. And I realize the time frame is relatively short here. It's sort of a byproduct of the planning process that got us to this point. As Mr. Palmer had said earlier, the result appears to be very attractive and favorable, but it took some time. So here we are. So that is it in a nutshell, and I guess certainly we can consider acting on the resolution farther down on the agenda where it's located. For purposes of my report, if we wish to proceed, then we'd be left at this point with talking about the contract amendment and the $3,000 fee.
Comments?
I noticed in there that they were recommending that we, to keep it at the $400,000 level, we would eliminate some portion of the project. I believe they said the one pavilion or something. The amounts they had in there it's not way over 400,000. And I was looking through the work that needs to be done. Is there enough of that work that we could do ourselves that would still accomplish that and then bring it down to the 400,000 or very close to the 400,000?
I don't know that I'm prepared to answer that question without talking to some of our staff. I mean, it's certainly a possibility.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, time is it's fleeting.
Right.
April 1st is our deadline, so I would move to have the supervisor and clerk execute the contract amendment with Beckett and Rader in the amount of $3,000 for grant preparation and submittal for the Ratcliffe Park improvement project as outlined.
I just had a quick question before anybody supports it. I guess you can support it. Do I need to wait?
Go ahead.
I thought when we talked at the work session, when Tim was here, I asked him that question, if it was going to cost us anything, and he said no.
That would be under the proposal they submitted, where we would commit then to use them for implementation.
Okay.
So the question is, not knowing what they would charge for design and construction engineering services, essentially, do we want to sign up with that agreement? Plus, it would have to undergo legal review and potential modification and so forth, and we're just right down to the wire time-wise. But your understanding is correct. That's what he did say.
Okay.
But there was some question about how firm the commitment would be that we would have to make to utilize their services, and turns out it's pretty darn firm.
Right.
But they've sort of covered that by saying they would, if they are awarded the contract for the entire project, then they would count that $3,000 towards that, if I'm understanding
Correct.
this
Okay.
correctly.
All right, is there support?
Yes, I'll support that.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Byer. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, Downtown Development Authority Lighthouse location.
Yes, the DDA purchased a channel marker or small lighthouse that was at the mouth of the river for many years. The thought was that it should be retained in the community. It's an important historical landmark and can be used as a promotional tool. The structure has been refurbished at this point, and they are looking for a place to locate it. They had thought that the parking lot adjacent to the west of the new artisan market that the township owns would be a good location. That's referenced in the minutes of February 22nd for the DDA. I've also attached some hand-drawn maps showing exactly where the structure would be in the parking lot if it is approved by the township. There's also assessor's office information outlining the ownership of the township for the property in question. Presumably, if we were going to approve this, the implementation would be undertaken through some kind of a lease arrangement, so that there's a formal understanding as to where it would be located, for how long, who maintains it, those kind of things. So based upon the fact that the assumption that a lease would be needed, the question is the general concept acceptable to the board? Do we want to have the structure in the parking lot? And if so, then we would go ahead and prepare a lease.
Comments?
I don't have a problem with the lighthouse going there. However, I don't know if you guys have been over to the building or looking at it directly, but the light pole and there's a tree that kind of block the view of the building, and vice versa when you're at the building looking out to the street, that maybe we can do something with that too, just to open it up and make it more visible. I just think with what we're trying to accomplish there, the light pole kind of gets in the way and is unattractive, if you ask me.
This would be a lifetime lease?
Well, that would be a question. Do we want to do a lifetime? Do we want to do a longer term, 20, 25 years? I suppose it depends too whether it has any kind of a cancellation provision.
I would say why not just do the lifetime lease and have a provision if they want to move it, they can. Whatever time, no sense revisiting it.
My thoughts on this are, I appreciate and like the historical significance of the lighthouse. I'm not convinced. I'm not crazy about the location, but this is the DDA. I'm looking at this from the standpoint of this is the DDA's project. It's baby, so to speak. And from my understanding, they've spent a lot of time discussing this, and they've given it much more consideration than I have, just in considering this packet. So I'm gonna trust their decision has weighed all the options and that they like where they have it. But so those are my thoughts on it.
My thoughts are similar to yours. I attended the DDA meeting and kind of pleaded with them to strongly consider where, coming from the south, where Lake Street V's off from US 23, right in it. It's kind of a V-shape. And as people are coming into our town from the south, bang, there it is. But I guess there's just too many. It's in Oscoda Township, but the DDA extends into Oscoda. No. Okay, so it's in Oscoda and it's out of the DDA range. There is a major utility pole there with wires coming and going everywhere. I don't know if that's a movable thing. And the property owner of the V is, I don't know if anybody's succeeded in getting an opinion from her, but that would be my choice. But like yourself, John, if it's got too many complications, this is just as long as it's close enough to the road. So it's, you know, I was hoping the two hand-drawn maps don't help me very much, but the air photo does. You know, and it seems to be that it's fairly close to 23, which I think is good. It's not set way back like the building is. So.
Well, I don't really have a problem with the location. I have a more basic problem with this agreement, and that is that it's come to my attention that we don't have, or we can't find, articles of incorporation for the Downtown Development Authority itself. And that document would be what creates the authority, and without that, it doesn't exist. So my problem is with us entering into agreement with an entity that technically doesn't exist. I think that can be remedied if the documents can be found, or if they can be reissued, then we're back in business. And like I said, I don't have a problem with the location. It's a basic problem with the entity itself. If it doesn't exist, we wouldn't be able to enter an agreement with them.
As being largely responsible for the township's records, not that I'm in charge of the DDAs, but I didn't know such a problem existed. I've had no inquiry as to the location of the doc. I didn't know we were on a hunt for it. I didn't know it was in question. So I may be of some use in that regard. If that's directed towards me, I can potentially help. So,
Well,
in whatever way I can, I'm willing.
I'm sure when those were drafted, it was well before your time here.
Certainly, but
So
there's a
There
lot of
should
stuff.
be records of it.
lot
We
of
should
stuff
be
in
able to
my,
locate those records, I would think.
Certainly, if I know that I need to look for them, I can do that.
I mean, we were able to locate the Articles of Incorporation for the water from 1993. It seems like we should be able to locate these. And before, like I say,
agree.
my concern is before we would enter any sort of an agreement that those be located and we know that we're actually dealing with an entity that's legal.
Yeah, I agree. They should be easily found. Like I said, for me, the 90% of the battle is just knowing to look for it. But I might be. I mean, maybe they are gone. I don't know. I don't want to.
I'm sure they're there someplace.
Like I said, I didn't know that we were looking for them. So.
Well, there is corrective action that can be taken, it's my understanding, in the absence of not locating them also. So there's a solution to be had one way or another. It may be more advisable to consider the lease once that's happened or do it concurrently, but there is a way to address that.
Yes, if that problem is addressed, then I don't have a problem with location or having a long-term agreement with them.
Anything
This
else?
footage, is this from the curb or from the middle of the road?
Which drawing?
I'm on the first drawing, where it says remove stone bed. 15 feet on the north side, 25 feet, and then 22 feet north again. Is that from the curb?
I
Or is
believe
that-
that's the curb, but I would want to confirm that, yeah.
That's the middle of 23, boy, that's close to the highway. That takes up the sidewalk almost.
We have benches and stuff that are that close to the road there too.
Yeah, I know.
Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we grant the request of the DDA to place the lighthouse and create some kind of lease document prepared. And John can look for the articles of declaration or incorporation.
Support.
You're saying go ahead with the lease now? Mm-hmm. And, okay. So motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Byer. Roll call?
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
No.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
No. Motion's passed. I'm going to go ahead and go down to skip over item H, since it's informational, and go to item I, regarding sanitary sewer agreement with Oscoda.
So just one thing for clarification purposes relative to the DDA. Probably should mention that the search for the Articles of Incorporation has been undertaken as a staff function because we're sort of trying to help the DDA as opposed to a township function. Thus, the sort of a distinction in terms of having our township clerk involved previously. So I just want to make that clear. sanitary sewer agreement is something that we had spoken about before relative to the river crossing. This is the main that serves the development of mill estates in Oscoda Township, old mill estates. And originally, we had a location where we thought the connection was going to be made. There was difficulty in facilitating that on Oscoda's part. There was going to be a Plan B. Well, now we're back to Plan A, apparently, which is good news, I think, for them in terms of construction cost, et cetera. So when we were looking at going back to the original location, there was some question whether we needed an agreement in place with them. Now we're changing again. So make a long story short, they're wanting to move ahead here fairly soon with the project. And the question is, would the board be comfortable with authorizing development and execution of an agreement to facilitate that connection in the shorter term if that becomes necessary? I have not spoken with a Oscoda representative, but the communication that was left with me today said they're looking to do it in a matter of days. I'm sure we could probably put the project off, but the other alternative might be to try and have something for a work session and do a special board meeting in that type of a venue. And I suppose ultimately it depends on how significant you think the agreement might be, but that is the question. Do we want to try and lean forward here in the event that we are going to be asked to take a position in the relatively near future in terms of authorizing that connection?
So what we authorized before, did we authorize the agreement?
We just didn't get the agreement prepared because it came off the tracks. Now we're back on track, so my recollection is the agreement didn't get prepared. I need to confirm that, but it certainly hasn't been brought to this body for approval.
All right. Comments?
That's the one that goes underneath the river. On the north end of the bank parking lot.
Yes.
Okay.
It's moving north to the other location, though, onto the property where the drugstore is located now.
Oh, okay. All right.
Any comments?
Well, like you said, originally that was the location that we approved
Yeah.
in the beginning. So does that approval not count since it?
It does. This is about the specific agreement.
Agreement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And is that with Oscoda or at Gilbert's?
Would be with Oscoda.
With Oscoda. Oscoda's taking care of Gilbert's.
It's my understanding.
Okay.
So you need to know about going ahead with drafting the agreement?
And
Right.
executing potentially to allow the connection if the board's amenable to that,
Okay, so you're looking for authorization to execute it prior to the next board meeting?
if necessary, yes. And I apologize for the last minute nature of it, but
Is there a motion?
No, I'll make the motion to move ahead with it.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Gajewski, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, informational item, facilitation cost and option investigation.
yes, I presume this to be informational, but it could certainly be converted to action at the board's discretion. We had talked at the work session about potential hiring of a facilitator for team building, and I have identified a couple of options. One of them I knew about in general. I mentioned it at the work session. I've investigated subsequently. The other I did not mention. The two I've identified are Lewis Bender Consulting and Training Services. I've attached some information about Dr. Bender. Spent a fair amount of time on the phone with him. He does a lot of work for municipal associations. He's well known in those circles. He provided several references. I checked, got very positive feedback. Given the feedback from the references and what he did for them, the type of work, it would appear that his skill set might be well suited to meeting our needs as we discussed at the work session. He charges $2,000 a day plus travel if applicable. Based on our discussion, he thought it could take upwards of 3 or 4 days, probably 3 or less, but it's a process where he engages folks in discussion, and he's not certain as to how much progress will be made on a day-to-day basis. He also indicated if he did that and he didn't think it could be helpful, he would tell us that, and it could be limited to 1 day. That's not the outcome necessary, or it could be a successful outcome in 1 day. It's just sort of a process where you don't know till you engage him. He has a limited availability from a scheduling standpoint. He set aside Saturday, April 7th, in the event that we wanted to engage his services. That would be the first opportunity, and it sort of sounded like if that didn't happen, it might be sometime thereafter before he would be available. The other option that I had identified is Michigan State University Extension Services through their Ogama County office. They do conflict resolution workshops. That's a 3-hour session. The fee's $199 plus supplies and mileage. They will provide additional services. The fee for that is approximately $66 an hour. The facilitator said she would like to get feedback from us before she would attempt to define exactly what an additional scope of work might look like. That's obviously a more cost-effective avenue. In summation, after doing the evaluation, it would appear that the services Dr. Bender offers are well-suited to meeting local government needs, including the dynamics of effective board governance. I think, however, MSUE is a viable alternative, again, subject to providing them with more information about exactly what we need if it would go beyond that initial dispute resolution work session. Sort of an important distinction here or consideration is the board's perception of what the benefit might be of approving any outstanding issues. If the benefits are thought to be great, it probably justifies more time and money being spent. If you think the outcome is likely to be relatively minor in terms of benefit, a less intensive and expensive approach may be merited. There are undoubtedly other facilitators out there, but for purposes of tonight's discussion, these are the two that I've had a chance to do a little reference and other checking on.
Bob, what's the origin of the need of this? Where did this start? Help me.
It started at the board level. It was broached. I think actually the first time I heard it potentially may have been one of our pre-board work sessions. But it was broached at the board level as a potential benefit and expanded upon at our last work session to some extent.
I recall it being discussed then. And the need of this was what?
Well, that's a question probably more to be answered at the board level than my level. I think the perception is that there are some underlying potential conflicts that could benefit by resolution to allow the board to work more effectively in the future.
Conflicts that have arisen just in the last couple of months?
I'm definitely not going to speculate any further.
Okay. Because my feeling is, rather than spend $2,000 a day for the Dr. Bender plus travel expenses, you know, I'm probably the biggest pain in the butt about this conflict business. I was and am really bothered by what happened 6 weeks ago, and I'm not getting over it. I'm trying, but I know that two things, if two things took place. Number one is if we had some kind of insurance assurance that 43% of this board, 3 out of 7, would not be left out of the loop again. That was just wrong, okay? And if we could have insurance that that would be corrected. And secondly, if what Ann asked for tonight, just a public meeting of what did she do wrong to destroy 10 years of effort for Oscoda Township, and allow her to answer any of these questions. The curmudgeon here would be greatly satisfied, and you could save yourself $2,000 a day, you know. I just don't think we need to spend taxpayer money for this when those two simple things could be done and maybe smooth things out.
I think it's more than that, if you ask me, but.
Do you?
And I've had the pleasure of attending Dr. Bender being a facilitator for the Treasurers Institute, actually, for many, many years. And he is incredible about getting people to be involved and engaged. And I think that there's a lot of things that people on the board need to say to each other, or to be able to work together as a team. I think there's a lot of trust issues and different underlying currents that have been going on, not only in the last 6 weeks, but probably since the last election, if you ask me. So I think that it would be a tremendous benefit to have Lou to be here. Yeah, we could do something cheaper, but like Bob said, I think that if he can't help us, he can't help us. And has he ever had that issue where he's gone into a community and people just don't want to work together or don't want to try to pull it together for the community? And I think we owe it to the community to do that. It's been very difficult for the last 6 weeks, and I don't think it's getting any better, to be honest. I don't see people talking to each other about things. I've taken the step to try to talk. I sat down and spoke with Aaron. Nobody else, comes in to talk to me about anything. So, being left out of the loop always. So, continues to happen. So I think it would be a tremendous benefit. I think we need it. I think we need it for our community.
Real quick, just to mention that I've attended similar institutes as Jamie, in which Mr. Bender as Bob references, conducts training at. So just so that the board's aware of that. I've had the experience of hearing him talk. And my thoughts are, I wish I weren't in a position where I thought that this situation or scenario sounded appealing, or I was thinking about spending $6,000 of taxpayers' money. I wish I didn't feel like that was necessary. I feel like that's a little outside my control at this point in the process, and that's where I'm left. I feel like we need something. I feel like we owe it, like Jamie said, to the community. Considering we have a new superintendent potentially joining our township, our organization, I think it is best to ensure that the board needs to do what they can to ensure we're working together for when that new employee starts. Because it's been a tough go, I think, for the board, it's been mentioned tonight, but for the administration to be working under this board, I think that's pretty clearly evident. And I don't know that that's advisable or right or fair to expect a new employee fresh off the start to begin with that scenario or environment. So, again, I wish I didn't feel like we needed to do this, but I do seem to think that it would be advisable.
I will just add too, unless each board member can go into this and be honest and, be able to really open up and talk about the issues and do whatever, then that's the only way it's going to be beneficial. I can tell you I am not going to have a problem doing that. But I hope that if we do it and decide to use taxpayer money to do that, that we that we be honest and really make an effort at resolving the issues and move forward. Otherwise, don't bother.
And I appreciate what Mr. Byer said about we could potentially handle this ourselves. I'd like to think that we're true again. And if that is a possibility, then I think we should pursue that. But I'm skeptical about that. So.
What is the ultimate goal of doing this a team effort? Does that mean unanimous vote on everything? I mean, we had a couple of split votes here tonight, and I don't think it was bothersome. I voted no on the sale of the property, 5-1. I'm not bent out of shape about that. I spoke my piece. We had a couple people voted no on the navigation, so-called lighthouse location. Fine. I think a diversity of the opinion is fine. You know, I don't think it has to be unanimous on everything. That's kind of boring, you know. Is that what you're trying to get? Is 7-0 votes on everything, and now we're in good shape and we're a team?
No,
I hope not.
No, definitely not. Unfortunately, for me, just speaking for myself, I think that I've lost trust in board members, and I think there's a lot of undertones and other things that are happening, personally, if you ask me. And so I find it difficult to be able to try to engage somebody and actually wonder if I'm getting the truth, to be honest. Of course, you know, Jim, we've been disagreeing on everything for the last
And
years.
we're fine, yeah.
Exactly. But I know that's because I know that where you're coming from is an honest place.
The last 6 weeks, having a hard time getting beyond that. Wow.
Any other comments? All right, then on to resolution and ordinances. Resolution 2018-04, geographic format information sharing.
Can we go ahead and make it an action item and vote on it?
For the facilitator?
Yeah. Does it have to be informational?
It doesn't. I think that's at the board's discretion.
I mean, because really there was only, I'd like to hear anybody else's comments if they have any.
I should mention, too, it's not a substantial consideration, but I feel compelled to note that when I started doing references checks to talk to Dr. Brett Bender, it turns out that he had done some work with my brother when he was city manager in another community in Michigan, just so everybody knows that. With his community. So.
When in your conversation with Mr. Dr. Bender, did he, you said you had a relatively lengthy conversation, did he seem to think, and I get that he's trying to provide a service or sell a service, but he seemed to think that he had work to do here, things to be done, or?
I believe so, given the fact that he indicated he thought maybe more than one day would be appropriate, was sort of my assumption. But I think it's a situation where he would come and then assess, talk to folks and assess right away the magnitude of the potential issues and whether he could really help with them or not. Certainly after a day, you would know that.
Anything further on this subject?
I guess my only question would be if we move on from this, where do we go from here? Because just, I don't know how many days ago our last work session was, we discussed this premise and we had Bob do the work to move forward. I just wonder where we go from here then. what the thoughts of the board would be. Because there's been a lot of avenues laid out here tonight. We go $2,000 a day. There's a medium cost scenario. There's a scenario Mr. Byer raised with we just get down, sit down and talk. And then there's the unspoken avenue of let's just continue on without saying much. So I'm just curious as to which way we might be headed.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see the need in spending the $2,000 a day for a facilitator or mediator. If we're going to do it, I'd rather go with the MSUE option. But really what it comes down to is that we come to these meetings, we have to get our business done, and decisions are made. Some of us don't like some of the decisions are made at times, and that just happens. You know, we'll disagree on some things, but we still got to get business done. And that's just basically what it comes down to.
I agree wholeheartedly. And my whole goal in this is to get business done in the best and most efficient and right way we can. And I understand what Mr. Byer was talking about. The last thing I want is to see us all voting 7-0 and be a bunch of yes men and women. That's not what's good for Oscoda Township. That's not democracy at work, in my opinion. I will disagree with people all day long. My problem with some things that have happened recently is how they were done, and how we fix that, I don't know. Because again, I mean, sounds cliche, but my trust is shaken in that process. I'll disagree all day long and respectfully disagree, but I've lost respect for how things were done, and maybe I just have to suck it up and get through the next 2.5 years and figure out how to deal with that. I don't know, but that's my issue right now. Is I want to be ensured that we are doing things the right way going forward. And I'd like an assurance, like Mr. Byer said, in that regard. Maybe I won't get it, and that's something I'll just have to live with. But I guess I'm asking for it one way or another. So.
And I would like to just make it clear that I'm not bent out of shape because I lost, Absolutely. Because a decision was made and I didn't like it. Some people just don't get it. It's the way it was done. It's the method, the way it was done. You know, 4 people knew all about it. 3 did not. And Ann gets no opportunity to defend herself before the entire board. So that's my concern, is the way, not the result. Okay? I mean, that's the worst thing is that Byer's all mad because he lost 4-3. No, it's how he lost. So.
All right, so are we going to make a motion on this or go on to the next subject?
I'll make a motion that we go with Lou Bender. Have him come and do the evaluation. Because otherwise it isn't going to move forward unless we do some type of action tonight. Either way.
Is there support?
I'll support it.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Nordine. Roll call?
Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Byer.
No.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Gasky.
I hate spending $2,000, but yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed.
No, motion's passed.
So on that basis, then, we would be looking at April 7th?
Hey, I have a question. So he said it could take up to 3 days, but he's only mentioned 1 day booked in his calendar. That would be just for the evaluation? Is it?
Well, I don't know that I'd call it an evaluation. My understanding is he sort of assesses how much time will be necessary. So if he came and things went extremely swimmingly, I suppose it could just be 1 day.
Okay. That Saturday, I won't be here. I'll be as included as I can be, but I can't be here that Saturday, so.
Can we check for a different date then? Because it's
Maybe.
important everybody be there.
Okay.
All right, resolution 2018-04, geographic format information sharing.
This is a resolution that, if adopted, would have the township agreeing to authorize the county to share information, aerial photography that's garnered with the State of Michigan Center for Shared Solutions. It relates to some extent to topics that we have a little bit later on the agenda in terms of contracts and so forth for this program.
Comments?
81 square miles, that's just Oscoda Township?
Excuse me, Martin?
That 81 square miles, does that just include Oscoda Township
yeah,
or
I
not all
believe-
of it?
I believe it does, just, yeah.
This is the county agreement, right?
Right, right. This is Resolution 04.
The 81 square miles is in, later in the agenda.
Oh,
This is only for just GIS with.
Oh.
They are related. So
they are related, yeah, that's what I was wondering, okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Is there a motion?
I move that we go ahead with Resolution 2018-04.
Support.
Are these the correct resolution numbers? Because I know we did get an email the other day with correct numbers. Is that correct, John?
I have not, I know we got an email with corrections to the resolutions. I'm not sure that it was a
Number
change to
issue?
the number
Okay.
issue. I haven't,
Alright.
I haven't looked at the sequencing though, so I'm assuming that they're correct, but I don't know that.
Motion by Mr. Byer, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes,
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, resolution 2018-05, approving the MNRTF grant application for the Iosco Exploration Trail Phase 3.
Okay, this is the first grant we talked about during the public hearing session that would involve the next phase of the Iosco Exploration Trail and authorize submission of a trust fund grant application to pursue that. The grant itself would be in an amount of $1.756 million.
Any comments? Is there a motion?
I'll approve the resolution. Make a motion.
Is there support?
We're using the revised resolutions, not the ones in our packet, correct?
Right, that's why I'm not saying the number, just in case that one's
Okay.
not correct.
Yeah, yeah. It was,
Because then we'll have to change the motion.
I'll support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Palmer.
I should clarify here too. There's actually two numbers here for the grant. One is the 1.765, which would be part of the Transportation Alternatives Program, and then an additional $300,000 through the trust fund.
So the $300,000 grant is being used to leverage as a match to the Transportation Alternatives Program.
Right, right. I misspoke.
All right, we got motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Mr. Gasky,
yes,
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, resolution 2018-06, approving the M&RTF grant application for Ratliff Park improvements.
Yes, this is the project we talked about relating to Beckett and Rader. As I had mentioned, the local match is $100,000 with a $400,000 total project. The improvements are detailed in the narrative, include a boardwalk, fishing platforms, gazebo, potentially, and a paddlecraft launch and a pier. And I should note also that as our intent, I think the modification of the resolutions was the fact that these don't contain our standard signature block. So what we are going to do is use the standard township signature block in these resolutions.
Oh, okay. I just had a question about it, because I didn't ask it earlier, but if we get the grant, how soon do they start, are they going to start the progress on the park? Would they do something this summer? Or is there things that at the township level, we can do to start moving things along for that?
There could be. The actual project would not take place till at least 2019.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Yes, again, we've had 3 opportunities. This is the 3rd opportunity to speak on this topic, so I've been trying to pick and choose where I bring this up. But I just, before we formally do this, I'd like to say my focus is on the parks downtown. We've discussed it a lot in the work sessions. I would generally prefer to work on Furtaw Field, and then potentially the beach park, and then Ratliff. But for reasons, for the consultant we hired with Beckett Rader suggested that this project has higher scores, probably more marketable for a grant application, and with the time crunch, that's how we've ended up here. So that's why I'll be voting for it. But I don't want people to think we're focusing only on this park, or at least that's not my intention. I would like to get our efforts turned to Furtaw Field. So just want to make that clear. And we spoke about the gazebo earlier, and just so we're clear, it's a nice addition, but if we're looking to cut costs, that's where I'd start. So I don't know when we need to mention that for passing this resolution that includes language with the gazebo, or if we can change that later. But in my mind, that's changeable.
Yeah, I would agree. It seemed to get, it's important for us to stay right around that $400,000 mark, so the $100,000 would be a 25% contribution, so whatever we have to do to make that happen, I'm with Mr. Nordine. I think that's appropriate. My only thought was that we like the idea of the gazebo, and if we could get it at the $400,000 level, then I would like to pursue that. If we can't, then that I'm Mr. Nordine, that we could hold off on that. But when looking at the construction costs and some of the things were listed in there with, the new backhoes and stuff that we buy, a lot of the equipment that we have on site in the township would be useful to, take on some of these projects, or to do some of the work ourselves. And if that would help in getting that down to that 400,000, then, we could do the gazebo as well. But
I agree with that, yeah.
I agree totally. I could live without the gazebo if we can keep it at the $400,000 level, however we manage to do that.
Well, maybe the safest thing to do would be to strike the gazebo from the resolution and then suggest to the consultant that we add it as an option in the application. So if we solicited bids, make the gazebo an alternate in the whole project. If it comes in under the budget, fine. If it doesn't, then that's the part that we would
That would seem like a viable option to pursue. Yeah, I would agree.
Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve Resolution 2018-06 with the condition that we make the gazebo an option in that resolution.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call?
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Reed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, Resolution 2018-07, Critical Bridge Program, Kings Corner Road.
Yes, the next two resolutions are the same, with the exception of involving different bridges, and we are supporting the efforts of the Road Commission if we adopt them to obtain funding under the local bridge program to improve and repair those bridges. Again, Kings Corner and Rear Road bridges.
Comments?
Bob, do we know how long are they gonna close them down for? Or are they gonna do one side at a time?
Do not know, I certainly can find out, but those questions had not been posed as part of this process.
There's a lot of traffic on both them roads.
Yes, there are.
Wasn't, this was a subject some months ago at our board meeting, and we voted to approve this because it doesn't cost us any money, if I remember correctly, so we were
Right.
voting in favor of it. That was not a resolution, now we have to make a formal resolution to make this?
Well, we may have adopted resolutions previously. I believe this is probably to support a new application,
Oh,
meaning they probably weren't successful in the past.
oh, okay.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the resolution for the critical bridge program for Kings Corner Road.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, Resolution 2018-08, Critical Bridge Program for Ray Road. Any comments? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support. Motion by Mr. Byer, support by Mr. Weed. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, My Sale Partner Buy-Up Agreement. This is dealing with doing a higher resolution aerial photography for the GIS system. Asable wanted to do higher resolution over their more populous area. And so we discussed it with them. Theirs was a very small amount of square miles. Ours, to cover enough residential area, which brought us, I don't know how to define this to everybody, but brought us past the neighborhood up here that's north of Footsite, and to cover for the Wells Road neighborhood, brought us at 49 square miles. And My Sale said that if Asable increases theirs up to 22 square miles, and we increase ours originally at, I think it was 79 square miles, but then when they calculated up to make sure there was the full rectangle, it came up to 81 square miles. It only increased the cost by a few $100s. So I'm requesting that the township supervisor and clerk accept and sign the statewide authoritative imagery and LiDAR program, State of Michigan and Partner Agreement at a cost of the new cost, which was $8,000, what do we have on here? $8,020.62. Assuming that Asable will do the minimum of 20 square miles, but I believe they're set on doing 22 square miles. Are there any comments?
Seems to me it would be cost effective to do this now with the greater resolution as opposed to just doing the minimum that the county is proposing to do, and then find out later that, boy, we need a better resolution in some of these areas, and I'm sure it would be far more expensive to do it later on our own. It just seems like if we're putting money into this, it would be best to do it right the first time and have what we really need.
Any other comments?
So we're paying for this?
For higher resolution.
Yes.
Yeah. It's free, well, for us it's free, not for the county, but a 12-inch resolution.
Okay.
And right now, the next flyover is scheduled to be about 5 years from now. And as long as they can maintain funding in their program, they indicated there would be no additional costs to redo that. Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I'll move to authorize the supervisor and township clerk to execute a State of Michigan partner agreement at a cost of $8,020.62, pending approval by Oscoda Township Board for a minimum of 22 square miles in Oscoda Township as part of Resolution 2018-04.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Gasky,
Yeah.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, FVOP recommendation for Lagoon Chemical Feed Pump.
Did we need to deal with the interlocal agreement, the MySale interlocal agreement also in relation to that topic?
That is the agreement.
Well, the buy-up agreement's a little, we can deal with it at next meeting if need be, but I think it's a separate arrangement
From,
from MySale. One's the buy-up and one's the intergovernmental agreement. Kind of the standard one that was in the packet.
Isn't that?
At least it looks different. I guess that's my question.
So will we do this under two separate contracts? Asava would have theirs and we would have ours.
Okay.
So if Asava approves, we would still be only taking care of the Oscoda portion of it. But as far as MySale goes, that's all considered one big block. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I just wanted to
Do
make
we
sure.
still need to do an intergovernmental agreement for that?
Well, I guess we can explore that question.
Okay.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. I just, sure.
All right, Lagoon Chemical Feed Pump.
All right. A little simpler. The backup chemical feed pump at the Lagoon site failed, and our contractor has obtained quotations to replace it. They're recommending a prominent pump from Pumping Solutions at a cost of $3,732.23.
Any comments?
But we done the lagoons a few years ago. Was that a new pump or was that just there for a backup
It's been there for a long time.
for a long time?
Yeah. Yeah. Was not replaced, is my understanding.
If we need this pump, we need this pump. I seem to recall purchasing the same pump in August of last year. Like I said, if this one's burnt up, and we need a new one, and that's what they're asking for, then we need it. I just am curious to find out if this is the exact same pump we purchased in August.
Well, I think the one we replaced last year, and I will confirm this, was the primary versus the backup.
Okay, so
Yeah,
they've
that
both
was the
gone down
primary,
now.
yeah.
Is what it is.
Right,
Okay.
right.
All right. Well, then that makes sense.
Is there a motion?
I'll move that we purchase a pump from Prominent Pumping Solutions with a not to exceed of $3,732.23.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Gieske. Roll call?
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, Chamber of Commerce property use request for Paul Bunyan Days.
Yes, we have the request that we get annually for Paul Bunyan, along with a responding letter, a draft responding letter, and finally, the rental agreement form that we've used for the past several years for Paul Bunyan. So if the board is inclined to approve the request, I'm looking for authorization to sign and execute the letter, and for the supervisor to execute and clerk to execute the rental agreement on behalf of the township, subject to the chamber signing it also.
Comments? Is there a motion?
Bob, do they ever, any of their things ever, their requests change, or is it pretty much a standard form every year?
Kind of standard form. Modest changes occasionally, but nothing,
Major?
yeah.
Do they give you a heads up about these modest changes, or do you track them down by reviewing the request?
There is discussion normally.
Okay.
Yeah, they're good about that.
I'll make a motion that we request the property use for Paul Bunyan Days.
Support. Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Weed.
And also, you need to execute the agreement. Part of my motion, too. Okay.
Okay. Roll call?
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, Armor and RTF grant site control form for the Iosco Exploration Trail for Phase 3. Any comments regarding that?
I have one comment regarding that. In box 3 at the bottom, we have put in their proposed agreement with the Oscoda County Road Commission to use a portion of the right-of-way, and proposed agreements with Department of Natural Resources and U.S. Forest Service for the path. Should we not include Consumers Power in that? Or I guess I should say, should we include Consumers Power in that as a stakeholder?
I don't know, we can find out.
Seems like they should be included if.
Any other comments?
One question, I guess, would the board be willing to entertain approving execution of the same form for the Ratliff Park project, should that be necessary, which it likely will? I think our consultant's going to be asking somebody to sign that form at some point.
I'm willing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Two birds with one stone.
So is there a motion regarding the MNRTF grant for the site control for the bike path pending information regarding consumers, energy, and FERC?
I'll move.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Gieske. Roll call?
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Is there a motion regarding the MNRTF site control form regarding Ratliff Park?
I'll move.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Byer.
Yes, and while we're talking about Ratliff, I'm remiss if I don't mention, talked to an official of the Vela Board, and I should have said this earlier, but anyway, regarding Ratliff, and we're talking about the different parts that we can tweak the idea, what's the word I'm looking for, that we're gonna have to pull out maybe at Ratliff. Because we can't afford it.
The gazebo.
Thank you. The gazebo, yes. But they have a fund of a small multiple of thousands of dollars that they're willing to give us to develop Ratliff Park. If these are parts of the overall plan that they particularly are interested in, they reserve the right to decide where the money goes and so forth. But anyway, there is some added money from the Vela Board out there for Ratliff. And the two representatives have exited the meeting here, but I wanted to mention that. I'm going to have to leave. Most of you know why. Maybe 43% of you don't, but you're used to that, so I gotta go. So,
Finish roll call?
Mr. Gasky.
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, the Oscoda Asable Senior Center Building Authority alternate member appointment. So as it shows in here, we have 3 positions on the Senior Center Building Authority. Oscoda Township has 3 positions on it. We have 4 people who have been designated to be on it. And since the Senior Center Building Authority bylaws do not account for provisions for an alternate, it is then up to our board to designate an alternate. And out of the 4 people we currently have designated, Catherine Larrabee has agreed to being the alternate for that. So I'm requesting that we designate her as the alternate, leaving the other 3 as the primaries. Any
So moved.
comments?
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Gajewski, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Mr. Gasky.
Yes.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Byer is absent now, sorry. My apologies. Mr. Nordine. Yes. Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, Sunny Bun's non-exclusive recreational license.
Yes, we have pursuant to previous discussion of the board, updated the agreement to extend for 3 years, that being through November 1, 2020. We have forwarded it to Consumers Energy. They are finding it to be acceptable. Question has been posed by one of our board members, Trustee Gajewski, regarding the insurance requirement in paragraph 18. I believe that $500,000 figure dates back to when we originally established this understanding. We did some checking, and the company is currently providing $1 million in coverage, so we certainly can modify that to $1 million if that would be the preference of the board.
Any comments?
I have one consideration I'd like for the board to consider on this agreement, and that is the fee structure that we charge. This is a licensing situation, and we have licenses that we issue for other things in the township, permits and that sort of thing, that is based on a fee structure and not on a business's profits. I don't think that's appropriate that we base a fee on this one vendor's profits. My hope would be that we could institute I guess for lack of a better word, an ordinance in the township. So maybe we could encourage some other vendors or this vendor to provide some of these things at some of our other parks. Example, Ratcliffe Park, we're proposing a kayak launch dock. I would like to see us get some vendors at the beach park, Ratcliffe Park, maybe Footside Park, to have some of these other amenities that people could rent to use in the water. And I think it would be reasonable to set that up on a licensing basis where you would have something in the, let's just throw out a number, say $300 per month, or $1,500 for 6 months, $2,500 for a year. I think it might be one of those things where, you know, if you build it, they'll come, and so we could have some of these minutes. I'm sure the township doesn't want to be in the, you know, water toy rental business, but I think it would be something that people would. I've been to other beaches in other states and other countries that have all manner of rental toys that you can get, anything from what do you call those, where they pull you behind a boat and you go up in the air and fly around, and windsurfers that you can rent. They have those down in Tawas. I would, you know, with all the improvements and things to our parks that we're intending to do, I would like to just have that as something that we could possibly offer. And I think if we were to set it up on a licensing basis, as opposed to, you know, attaching people's profits, might be more advantageous. So.
Something to add to the work session?
Okay.
Sure, I wouldn't mind discussing it more. I think giving it some time for thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments regarding this recreational license?
I'd like to see that insurance coverage, the right figure in there, just in case something happens, which I wish it never does. But that way there's no confusion.
Anything else? Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve Sonny Bunce with the change of the insurance amount.
Could we hold off on that until we talk at our work session about changing the pay structure?
You're talking about changing the pay structure of this one, or implementing the service in another area?
Well, implementing the same thing in another area, but putting it into effect first here.
Anybody have any feedback?
Will we able to think we'll be able to accomplish that before the season starts? Or just maybe do a one-year agreement instead?
That would be my thought, with all the irons we have in the fire right now.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
It might be advisable to at least move this one forward, maybe on a shorter term basis, and then talk about the larger issue in the future.
Any comments on it?
Would it be that difficult to change this agreement for a different fee structure?
It wouldn't, but probably the long pole in the tent is deliberating about what fee structure might be appropriate in different circumstances. You know, what license structure do we want to establish for the longer term for different types of businesses, and you know, how much do you want to incentivize them, and all that? There's a lot of policy implications and all that.
But it seems to me we could start here and then use that same formula down the road for that.
Bob, how did we come to the formula of using the sales? Is there legal issues with that or anything tied to that?
Well, I think the underlying premise is that there's a commercial business being operated on public property, and the public's entitled to a return.
Right.
At what level that becomes a legal consideration, I would want to talk to the attorney about.
Right.
You've already researched that for the laws, and you can do either way. You can do a flat rate, or you can do this percentage rate based on income. I prefer a flat rate schedule because then we don't have to audit anything, because as of right now, if we're not auditing the books of
Sunny Buns.
of the person, of the company involved with this, then we're pretty much taking it at their word.
Right.
And using the percentage of the profits makes it more like a franchise deal. And generally in a franchise, each party gets something of value. You know, if you take out a franchise in McDonald's, you get to use that trademark name, plus all of the benefits that go along with it. We're not really providing them with anything other than a spot to locate. So to me, it just doesn't seem right to charge them a percentage of their profits to do something that's providing a benefit to our guests at Old Orchard Park, I guess is the way I would.
But I'm not sure if I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm not sure if we've got enough time for the board to deliberate over what kind of structure or fee structure we're going to go on before the season starts.
Me either. We got a lot in our work session we haven't even finished.
What I was going to say is, I mean, I haven't given this any thought other than the few minutes we've been talking about it. But just in response to what you said about the franchise agreement, just off the top of my head, we're providing the location, and it's a relatively good one with it being Old Orchard Park, built-in customers. So there's that. Again, that's just, off the top of my head, I haven't given it much consideration. My thought just initially, though, is we have an signed agreement on that party in hand, ready for the season. It seems logical to me to sign it, given the stack up we already have on our work session agendas. I mean, I'm ready.
And daily.
Yeah. So, I mean.
Make it a one-year agreement.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be fine.
That's what I said,
We could change
yeah.
it to a one-year agreement, and then would give us time to work on a fee structure, and since if the board thinks that it would be appropriate to expand this to a couple of other parks, then I would suggest we refer to the planning commission to come up with a fee structure, because it would be a land use item which should originate in the planning commission.
I'll make a motion that we change the agreement to 1 year and then look at the flat fee schedule at the work session. Add it to the agenda.
We have Mr. Gajewski's motion on the table.
Sorry.
I'll just change it to like 1 year, like Jamie said.
Okay,
I'll support that.
all right. Motion by Mr. Gajewski, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, strategic planning work session scheduling. For one thing regarding this, I recommend that we go ahead and schedule 2 work sessions prior to the next meeting. So that way, if we don't get everything done in the first work session, we can get stuff done in the second prior to the next board meeting, rather than having to wait an additional several weeks. Right now, I have the 28th and 30th.
This Wednesday, I have to go to election training all day on Wednesday. 30th is technically Good Friday. We're closed that day.
So you're saying you have all day then?
Potentially, yeah. I've got a church service to go to noon to 1, but other than that, I could be available.
Yeah, I'm available any day next week other than the 29th in the afternoon.
I wouldn't be able to do it this Friday. I have plans already. Because we were closed.
Okay, so
But I got anything else is open.
I have the afternoons open all of the week of April 2nd.
It's good to me.
2 that week?
Sure.
Sounds like fun.
Sounds like a great time.
Wednesday and Thursday, the 4th and 5th,
2
When's his-
o'clock?
When is Jim usually available or not available?
afternoons.
Okay.
Usually, I think it's Tuesdays and Thursdays aren't good days, but if it's later in
Morning.
the afternoon, it's usually okay.
Okay.
Well, that's potentially a challenge. I mean, I'm not saying we can't do it, but we're going to be trying to get the board packet out those 2
Oh,
days.
yeah.
So maybe one of them, but both would be tough.
Tuesday, Wednesday, or is that?
That'd be better, probably.
Okay. Well, we could do whatever.
Okay, April 3rd and 4th at 3 p.m.
Okay.
That works for me.
All right, I make a motion that we have schedule our next strategic planning work sessions on April 3rd and 4th, both of them at 3 p.m.
Support.
Mr. Weeds, support by Mr. Nordine. Roll call.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Gasky.
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. All right, we are now into our second public comment period. There's a 4-minute time limit. Anyone may speak. Is there anybody who wishes to speak? Nope, not for this one. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Mary Mertz, and I live on Bennett Lake, and I just would like to give you a little tidbit for consideration in your work session. If I want to entice people to come to rent paddle boards, kayaks, or anything, if right off the bat I know I have to pay $1,500, but I don't know that I'm going to have any interest, that would be a deterrent for me. Not that I'm enterprising or even thinking about doing it, but if I was going to do it on a commission basis or whatever Sonny Buns does, or what it appears he might do, it would be very attractive, and we might attract more people to try it for a year to see what the interest in doing that is, to go in conjunction with the new parks that we're establishing, because then we're not making such a financial commitment by having to pay that fee and maybe not even break even. Just something to think about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
My name's Lee Mertz, and I was appointed to the Oscoda Asabo Senior Citizen Building Authority tonight. And I just wanted to thank this board for that appointment, because I've worked and lived in this community for 40 years, and this community has given a tremendous amount of support to the programs that I've worked with over the years. And it's nice to be able to give something back.
Thank you for volunteering.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Arnie LaRidge, a resident of Oscoda, and I want to state up right up front that I'm glad to see the Parks and Rec and the board looking at all these potential grants and recreational facilities in the township. That's great. It's just this first one at Ratliff Beach. That used to be called Air Force Beach, I believe. And I even wonder if it was owned by the Air Force at one point and turned over to the town. I'm just guessing, because I'm not a Michigander. However, I just hope that due diligence questioning of the DEQ and the Air Force would just ask what their future plans are for remediation, because that beach is right on top of the next biggest plume for remediation that the Air Force has said is going to occur in their plans about 2 to 2.5 years from now. So just a cautionary, just ask them so that there's no big issues when that happens. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, then we're on to board comments. Does anybody have anything? All right, then I need a motion to go into closed session with Mr. Stalker and our attorney regarding pending litigation.
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Gasky.
Yes.
Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed.
Yes, we are now in closed session.